In this video you will learn another spectacular bishop sacrifice in the Barry attack. White played d4, placing a pawn in the center. Black answered with knight f6, developing his king's knight and taking control over the e4 square, to prevent white from occupying the center with his pawns. White played knight f3, developing his king's knight towards its natural square and increasing control over the central squares. Black responded with g6, with the idea of developing the king's bishop towards the g7 square, where it will be very well placed, since it will occupy the large diagonal of dark squares and put pressure on the center. White played knight c3, developing his queen's knight and taking control of the e4 square. Now, white threatens to occupy the center with his pawns with the move e4. Black answered d5, placing a pawn in the center and taking control of the e4 square, to prevent the opponent from occupying the center with his pawns. White played bishop f4, developing his queen bishop to a good square. Black played bishop g7, developing the king's bishop and preparing to castle. White played e3, connecting his pawns, reinforcing the defense of the d4 pawn and at the same time allowing the development of the king's bishop. Black castled. White played bishop e2, completing the development of his minor pieces. The white bishop is very well placed on e2, as it points towards the h5 point. White's plan is to castle on the queen side, take his knight to the e5 square and then advance with h4 and h5, to attack on the king side. Black played c6, reinforcing the defense of the d5 pawn, allowing the queen to move to the a5 square and preparing to advance with b5 to try to create counterplay on the queen side. White answered h4, beginning to advance his pawns on the king side. His plan is to continue with h5, then capture on g6 and open the h-file for the attack. Now black played bishop g4, developing the queen's bishop, increasing control over the h5 square and attacking against the f3 knight. White played knight e5, placing his knight on a strong square in the center and threatening to capture the enemy bishop. Black replied bishop takes e2, and after queen takes e2. Now black played knight b to d7, attacking the knight on e5, which is a very strong piece. White castled on the queen side. If black now captures the white knight, white can capture with the pawn or also with the bishop and will be able to continue his attack with moves like g4 and h5, and if necessary he can also play f3 to organize a strong attack on the king side. Black played queen c8, with the idea of defending the c6 pawn and being able to advance with b5, to start the counterattack on the queen side. At the same time the black queen points towards the g4 square, with the idea of also defending on the king side and trying to stop white's attack on that flank. White played f3, reinforcing control over the g4 square, with the idea of being able to advance with g4 and continue his attack on the king side. If black now plays b5, white answers with g4. And b4 is not possible, because white responds with knight a4 and can continue with moves like b3 to defend the knight and black's attack is stopped on the queen side, while white can attack on the king side. And if black makes the move h5, to stop the advance of the white pawn. White plays rook d to g1 and will be able to open lines on the king side and white has the advantage. In the game, after f3, black played h6, preparing to advance with g5 and try to keep the game close once the white pawn advances to the h5 square. White played g4, continuing the advance of his pawns and threatening to advance with h5. Now b5 would not be good, because white responds with h5. After g5, white can sacrifice his bishop with bishop takes g5. Which is a bishop sacrifice that we already learned about in the previous video. After h takes g5. White plays h6, attacking the bishop. After bishop h8. White plays h7 check and wins. For example, if knight takes h7, white plays knight takes d7, and after queen takes d7, then queen h2 and mate is inevitable. In the game after the move g4, black played knight e8, retreating with the knight to be able to close the kingside, in case white advances with his pawns. For example, if white now advances with h5, black counters g5 and keeps the game close. And now the sacrifice of the bishop with bishop takes g5 is not possible, because black captures the bishop and after h6, he can play bishop takes e5 and black defends himself and is winning. And it is not good to advance with g5 either, because black answers h5, keeps the game close and defends himself. Since the attack with the pawns on the kingside is not effective, white played e4, attacking in the center. White combines the attack on the kingside with the opening of the center, taking advantage of his greater mobility and piece activity. If black now captures the e4 pawn, white can recapture it with the knight and has an advantage, because he controls more space and has more active pieces. And if black plays b5, trying to attack on the queenside, white can respond by capturing the d5 pawn, and after b4, white responds with knight takes c6 and is left with the advantage. In the game, after the move e4, black played knight b6, reinforcing the defense of the d5 pawn, to avoid losing material. White played queen d2, threatening to capture the h6 pawn. Black played king h7, to reinforce the defense of the h6 pawn. It seems that everything is defended, but now white played the surprising move bishop takes h6. A surprising bishop sacrifice with the idea of weakening the opposing king's defenses. White has a decisive attack. The game continued bishop takes h6. g5, attacking the opposing bishop. Now, bishop g7 is not good, because white follows h5 and has a very strong attack. White threatens to capture on g6 to open the h-file, and then he will be able to move his queen to the h2 square and the black king will not resist many more moves. For example, in case of bishop takes e5, white captures on g6 with check and white wins. The black king will not resist many more moves. In the game after g5, black played knight f6, returning the piece to try to repel the attack. The game continued g takes h6, capturing the bishop. Black played knight h5, to try to block the game and try to defend his king. White played rook h to g1, with the idea of continuing with f4 and f5, to open the g-file for the attack. Black played queen e6, with the idea of bringing the queen closer to the defense. White played rook d to e1, repositioning the rook and aiming at the opposing queen. Black answered queen f6, removing the queen from the opposing rook's line of attack and threatened queen f4, with the idea of exchanging queens. Now, it was good king b1, to avoid the exchange of queens. In the game, however, white played knight g4. Queen f4, trying to exchange queens, is not good, since white takes on f4, and after the exchange of queens, then captures on d5, which opens the file to the rook and white is winning. It is also not good to capture the h4 pawn, since the h-file is left open and white has an advantage. In the game after knight g4, black played queen d6. White played e5, attacking the opponent's queen. After queen e6, white played knight e3 with the idea of continuing with knight e2 to continue with f4 and f5. The game continued rook a to c8. Knight e2, with the idea of preparing the advance with f4 and f5. c5. Black tries to create counterplay on the queenside. White played rook g5, continuing his attack on the kingside, increasing control over the f5 square and attacking the opponent's knight. In case of c takes d4, knight takes d4 would follow. And after queen h3, white plays rook e to g1 and is threatening to sacrifice the rook by capturing on h5 and white is winning. For example, in case of queen takes h4, white plays rook 5 to g4, and after queen h3, white plays e6 and is winning. In the game after rook g5, black played queen h3. And after rook e to g1. It is not possible to capture the f3 pawn, because black loses the queen. In the game black played rook g8. White played d takes c5, and after rook takes c5. White played knight d4, centralizing the knight and defending the f3 pawn. Black played knight c4, invading the opponent's camp with the knight and attacking the queen and the opponent's knight. The game continued knight takes c4. Rook takes c4. b3, to force the enemy rook to retreat. Black played rook c7, to defend his rook. Now white played rook takes h5. It is not possible to capture the rook since white would win. In the game, black played f6, to try to trap the white rook. The game continued e takes f6. E takes f6. Rook takes d5 and black resigned. In this video we have learned another surprising bishop sacrifice, which offers white a strong attack.